Tonight, we step into a different kind of cold. The kind that creeps into your bones, into your breath, into the fragile walls you lean against for safety. Picture yourself standing on the endless prairie at dusk. The last ribbons of pink light slip beneath thick clouds. The horizon stretches so wide, you could almost fall into it. The air is sharp. It carries that unmistakable smell of snow, metallic and dry, as though the earth itself is warning you. You probably won't survive this. Not unless you find shelter. Not unless you build walls that the blizzards cannot reach. So, before you sit down and get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel. But only if you really like what I do here. And while you're at it, leave your location and time of night in the comments. I want to know who's drifting through this story with me. Now dim the lights. Let the hum of the day fall quiet. Breathe a little slower. You're standing on soil that only months ago sang with tall grass. Families traveled here, with wagons creaking and oxen huffing, chasing a promise of land. But winter is no gentleman. It does not wait until you're ready. By October, the winds blow harder, stripping the trees bare, shaking the loose boards of unfinished cabins. Settlers moving west in the 1800s often underestimated how brutal winters could be. Even seasoned farmers from Europe found themselves shocked. The sheer power of a prairie blizzard could erase the landscape within hours. Temperatures plunged below 20 degrees below zero. What looked like mild snowfall twisted into a white wall that swallowed everything. You catch the rattle of a wagon tarp. You imagine what the pioneers carried. Axes, saws, maybe a plow. Too ambitious for soil, still locked in frost. Children clung to dolls, stuffed with rags. Mothers carried iron pots and jars of lard. And here's something curious. Some families even packed treasured pianos, dragging them across hundreds of miles of wilderness. Picture that absurd image. A family playing Beethoven while the wind shrieks at the door, as if culture itself could hold back the storm. Still, there's no delaying the work of shelter. At sunrise, men with frost on their beards drag logs across the snow, chopping until their hands blister. Women gather whatever brush they can find, tying it into bundles for kindling. Children scurry after them, cheeks red and noses running, doing small chores that keep them from freezing still. Step closer in your mind. The earth smells raw where a spade has broken ground. Someone's voice calls out, a mix of exhaustion and hope. Inside the half-built cabin, there's no warmth yet, only the echo of hammer against nail. You brush a hand along the rough bark of a log wall. The surface is splintery, sticky with resin. It doesn't feel like much protection, and your shoulders tense with the thought of the first true blizzard crashing down. Pause a moment. Feel the silence between gusts of wind. It's heavy, pressing against your chest. Out there, wolves pad quietly, their paws soundless over snow crust. The settlers sense them, or at least imagine they do. Shadows flicker at the edges of lamplight. It's enough to quicken your breath. And still, there's something oddly peaceful about this landscape. The sky stretches out like a wool blanket, gray and infinite. The crunch of your boots through the drifts has a sleepy rhythm to it. It's easy to imagine curling up under that heavy sky, letting the storm sweep overhead. But the settlers could not afford such calm. They raced against time, working dawn until nightfall. building walls thick enough to trap fire's warmth, roofs angled steeply to shed snow. Every cut of the saw was a prayer against the storm. A basic one-room log cabin could be raised in just a few weeks. Though on the open prairies, where trees were scarce, this was no small task. Settlers who found groves near rivers considered themselves lucky. Those without them had to haul wood across exhausting miles. You watch as timber becomes walls, each log notched with an axe, shaping them so they lock together like puzzle pieces. A cabin wall is never just stacked. Each timber must fit snug, corners strong enough to resist the push of the wind. Some families worked together in what was called a raising. Neighbors trudged through drifts to help lift beams, each man grasping an end, each woman providing food to keep spirits from breaking. And here's something tender. A few families carved their initials into the logs before stacking them, even hearts, as if romance could live inside walls of sap-stained pine. Imagine lying on the floor at night, the wind screaming outside, knowing that behind your head is a little carved heart, a hidden symbol of stubborn hope. Step inside your imagined structure. The floor is packed earth, rough under your boots. The walls rise log by log, not straight and tidy like a city house, but slightly uneven, each timber bearing the scars of a hand axe. There is no glass for windows. Openings are small, left rough-edged, waiting to be covered later with greased paper or hides. Picture the smell. Fresh wood mingled with sweat, the iron tang of blood from a cut finger. In the corner, a woman kneels beside a small fire. She tends a pot of beans and salted pork, the scent oddly sweet in this barren season. Her hands are cracked, but she hums softly, trying to keep the children calm. A baby, wrapped in quilts, sleeps nearby, tiny breath fogging the air. Snow flurries swirl through the cracks of half-built walls. You feel them sting your cheek, melting on your eyelashes. Someone yells to hurry. The cabin must have at least 4 walls before nightfall, or the family will freeze in their wagon again. You glance toward that wagon, canvas tarp sagging, not nearly enough to hold back what's coming. You understand why the family works without pause. The walls reach shoulder height, then taller, until you crane your neck. They heave logs together, fitting them like giant toys. Though there is nothing playful here, you pause and feel the storm gather. The air presses heavier, clouds thickening overhead. The prairie seems to flatten beneath that sky, endless and unforgiving. Imagine yourself lifting the last log, straining as muscles scream, your breath coming in ragged bursts. At last, the cabin stands closed. Though crude, the roof will come later. For now, a canvas stretched across beams. But tonight, at least, the family will sleep inside 4 timbered walls. Step across the threshold in your mind. The cabin smells of pine and mud, of human breath and hope. The floor crunches with stray snow dragged in by boots. A lantern flickers on a crude shelf, casting shadows that make the logs seem alive. You trace the seams where light glimmers through. Tomorrow, they will be chinked with moss, clay, or old rags. Tonight they remain open, and you feel the draft snake across your ankles. Still, there is comfort. The fire, now transplanted into a hearth built of stones, pops with resin. Sparks leap up the chimney gap, tracing into the night sky. You feel warmth radiate across your hands. A dog curls near the hearth, its body steaming faintly from melted snow. The family exhales in unison, a single sigh of survival. You lean against the wall, listening to the storm build outside. The logs creak, but they hold. Snow hisses against the roof canvas. Somewhere in the dark, wolves pad silently, their howls carried faintly across the plains. Inside, you share the strange comfort of thin walls, the knowledge that danger is just beyond reach, yet not quite inside. Close your eyes now. Picture the cabin standing alone, a fragile box of timber on an ocean of snow. Its lamplight glows faint through cracks, a faint yellow pulse in the white wilderness. The wind batters, but for tonight, you are safe. But timber was not the only answer. You step softly forward, your boots crunching on frozen ground. Ahead, something stranger rises from the prairie. It looks less like a house and more like a mound of earth, a low hill disguised as part of the landscape. Families dug straight into the soil itself to make shelter. The sod house, heavy, earthen, and unglamorous, was the refuge of countless frontier settlers. Imagine taking the very skin of the prairie and turning it into walls. Settlers cut thick rectangles of sod, each about the size of a loaf of bread, their roots and grasses still tangled. They stacked them like bricks, one upon another, until a wall grew waist-high, then taller, until it enclosed a room. By the 1870s, sod houses were the most common dwelling on the treeless plains of Nebraska and Kansas. They were quick to build, sturdy against wind, and surprisingly warm once snow began to pack against their sides. You crouch down to touch one of these sod bricks in your mind. It's damp, smelling of grass and loam, like a meadow torn up and reassembled indoors. As you press your hand, soil crumbles onto your palm, leaving a dark stain. Families discovered that, in winter, this dirt wall could hold heat better than wood, like an earthen quilt wrapped around the body. And here's something curious. Some settlers complained that snakes would slither right out of the sod in spring, warming themselves near the hearth. Imagine lying half asleep under a patched quilt and spotting a curious snake poking its head from your wall, a surprise housemate. Still, the work was grueling. Cutting sod meant hours of back-breaking labor, lifting each block with a spade, dragging it across the ground. Step inside. The ceiling is low, supported by timbers, dragged from far away, or improvised from wagon parts. Sometimes even prairie grass itself was woven across for a roof. You can smell the mustiness, the sharp tang of damp earth. When snow falls thick above, you hear it pressing, muffled thumps on the roof that feel heavy against your chest. Inside, the floor is also dirt, swept smooth but never quite clean. You feel it cool beneath your soles. Moisture seeps upward, leaving patches damp. Buckets sit against the wall to catch leaks from snowmelt dripping through the roof. Children shuffle in their patched socks, leaving trails of muddy prints that never quite fade. Yet, despite the gloom, families made these dugouts into homes. Quilts hung from the walls added color. Shelves built from spare planks held precious tins of flour and jars of preserves. And the sound. You listen now to the dull crackle of a fire in a crude stove, its iron glowing orange, throwing heat that warms one side of you, while the other side stays cold. The smoke curls lazily, too sluggish to leave, and the air is heavy, pressing on your lungs. Imagine the nights here, wind screaming outside, wolves prowling unseen, but within these soil walls, sound softens. It feels almost like being underground, hidden away from the world. Perhaps you even sense the calm of hibernation. Like a bear in its den, families lay close together, on bedding made of straw and patched quilts, bodies pressed for warmth. You feel the scratch of straw against your cheek, the weight of another's breath beside you. Still, hardship lingers in every breath. The damp air clings to your clothes, leaving them moldy if left unwatched. Insects, spiders, beetles, they wander in from the sod, and when heavy storms came, roofs collapsed under the weight of snow, burying families in an instant. You hear the imagined crash, the sudden choke of dust, and the frantic scramble to dig free. The prairie gives, but it also takes back. Step outside again in your mind, blinking against the blizzard's brightness. From a distance, sod houses vanish into the prairie, low earthen humps with smoke trailing upward. They looked so much a part of the land that travelers often missed them entirely. One account describes a traveler nearly riding his horse straight onto a sod roof, unaware that a family sat eating supper beneath. That image lingers. The fragility of life, separated from hooves and storm only by a layer of dirt and faith. Pause. Let the wind rush past your ears. Hear the low whistle as it cuts across the endless plains. You smell snow in the air again, metallic and dry, mingling with the scent of earth rising from the sod walls. There's something both humbling and claustrophobic about it. You realize that on this frontier, the very ground you walk on can become your roof, your walls, your last line of defense against the storm. And still, despite all of this, families laughed here. They sang hymns, told stories, played fiddles if one had survived the journey. A dog curled in the corner, children giggled under patched quilts, and a woman stirred stew in an iron pot, steam fogging the earthen ceiling. You feel the warmth of that moment, life blooming inside soil, fragile but stubborn. It is almost a paradox, isn't it? Something so temporary, so crude, yet it became the stage for memories, births, and even weddings. You imagine candles flickering against sod walls as a couple exchanged vows, snow drifting outside, the storm held at bay for just a moment, and as you let that thought linger, the walls around you blur, the sod dissolves into shadow, the hum of the storm softens. You are left with the echo of breath, the weight of damp air, and the faint comfort of being hidden underground. While the blizzard rages above, the storm has gathered strength, and you feel the prairie tilt into a harsher rhythm. The log cabins and sod dugouts you've glimpsed now blur behind the falling snow. What comes into focus next is far more fragile. Canvas stretched across poles, the temporary tents that too many families still relied on when the first true blizzards arrived. You step closer, your boots sinking deep. The canvas flaps in the gale, like the wings of a frightened bird. Someone has tied ropes to stakes driven into frozen soil, but the wind pulls at them, stretching fabric until the seams groan. Inside, the space is cramped, with walls thin enough that you can hear every whistle of air outside. One well-documented reality of frontier life was that newcomers often reached their land too late in the year to build permanent homes. They set up canvas tents, wagon covers, or makeshift lean-tos, thinking they would last until spring. But the prairie offered no mercy. When temperatures plunged and snow came in sheets, those thin fabrics were little more than paper against the storm. You duck under the flap in your imagination and feel the chill. The air inside is barely warmer than the air outside. Children huddle in blankets, their breath rising in pale clouds that cling to the roof and drip back down as icy water. Someone tries to heat the space with a small fire, but sparks nearly catch the fabric. You smell smoke mixing with damp cloth and realize how quickly hope could vanish if flames spread. Curiously enough, families sometimes insulated their tents by piling snow against the sides, hoping the drifts would serve as walls. Imagine the irony, using the very storm you fear to help you survive it. Snow pressed tight might trap heat, but it also made escape harder if winds tore through or fire caught. Yet desperation teaches odd lessons, and the settlers learned them in long sleepless nights. Picture the sound now. The wind lashes the canvas until it snaps like a whip. The poles groan and shift in their sockets, snow piling against one side until it threatens to cave in. Every gust rattles the pegs, and you imagine the sickening moment when one gives way. The whole structure shudders, and for a heartbeat, you fear it will collapse on the shivering family inside. You sit with them, your knees brushing damp ground. The earth beneath is frozen solid, but water pools on the surface, seeping into bedding. Quilts lie heavy with dampness, smelling of mildew. The air is filled with the rasp of coughing, the sharp cries of children who cannot sleep. A kettle rattles on a crude iron trivet, its steam curling weakly before fading into the chill. Still, there are moments of stubborn humanity here. Someone reaches for a fiddle, drawing out slow notes that rise above the storm. The sound is thin but sweet, and for a few minutes, the tent becomes a cocoon of melody. You lean your head back, eyes closed, letting the music soften the roar of wind, if only for a heartbeat. And here's an odd anecdote that survives. Some families kept livestock just outside the tent walls, tying horses or cows nearby, so their body heat might drift inward. The smell was pungent, but warmth was warmth. Imagine drifting to sleep, listening to a horse breathing just beyond the fabric, your survival tied literally to its breath. The canvas sags lower as snow builds heavier. Inside, conversation grows quiet. Everyone is listening. The parents, the children, even you, to the relentless push of nature. The prairie outside is blank, erased by white, but in here, it is claustrophobic. A cage made of flapping cloth. You run your hand over the fabric and feel it tremble, like a living thing. When the storm's peak arrives, you feel the whole tent sway. Snow drives in through seams, stinging your cheeks, melting into icy streaks. Children whimper, mothers shush, fathers brace poles with their shoulders. You imagine yourself doing the same, your back pressed to a shaking beam, praying it will hold until morning. The night stretches long. Sleep comes only in fragments, each one shattered by the tent snapping overhead. At last, a gray light seeps through the fabric. The storm eases, leaving drifts piled like walls around the camp. You crawl out into the brittle air, blinking at a landscape transformed into an endless desert of white dunes. The tent behind you looks pitiful, sagging, frayed, yet somehow still upright. You exhale slowly, feeling the exhaustion of the family who lived through it. The lesson is clear. Canvas was never meant to fight a blizzard, but it carried them through this night, and sometimes one night was all you needed to reach the next step in survival. As you step back, snow crunching beneath you, the tent fades behind the veil of falling flakes. The prairie stretches endless, demanding more than fabric, demanding walls of wood earth, and determination. And so you move forward. Toward the next shelter, the settlers carved against the cold. The air is sharp tonight, a whetted blade slicing across your skin as you approach the crude log walls once more. This time, you pay closer attention, tracing with your imagination the tiny seams where icy wind snakes through. Even a thick log cabin could betray its builders. If the gaps between timbers weren't sealed properly, you find yourself standing shoulder to shoulder with a frontier mother, mud-stained apron pulled tight. She stoops with a bucket and a small child at her side. Together, they press handfuls of material into the cracks, determined to banish the drafts. The gaps between stacked logs were rarely snug enough to stop air, so families filled them with whatever was at hand: clay, mud, straw, moss, even strips of worn clothing. All were stuffed into crevices, sometimes reinforced with sticks. Without this step, the structure became little more than a sieve, letting cold rush in and precious heat flee. Imagine trying to keep a fire burning all night while the wind whistled through dozens of tiny slits around you. Chinking meant survival, pure and simple. You crouch down in the half-lit cabin, the dirt floor cool beneath your knees. Your fingers sink into a mixture of mud and moss, sticky and cold. You smear it into the gap between two logs, watching as the darkness disappears, replaced by a dull brown patch. The smell is earthy, sharp, like wet ground after a storm. The children giggle as they dab mud on their noses, turning a chore into a fleeting game. And here's something stranger. Some families, short on resources, stuffed rags, or even pages torn from hymnals and newspapers into the spaces. Imagine reading yesterday's headlines plastered against your wall, the ink smudging when touched by frost. It's an odd intimacy, words meant for public eyes, pressed into the private cracks of your home, a thin paper shield against the roar of winter. You tilt your head and listen. The storm outside hasn't ceased, but the whistling is softer now, muffled by the freshly packed seams. You run your hand along the wall and feel only the faintest tremor of wind. There's relief in that sensation, as though the house itself exhales, content to keep its warmth a little longer. Still, the work never ended. Each morning, settlers checked the walls, patching where the mud had crumbled overnight, or where snow had melted and seeped in. You can almost see them circling the cabin with buckets of clay, boots crunching over frost, steam rising from their breath. In this daily ritual lay both frustration and reassurance. Sealing the house again and again was a reminder of fragility, but also of control. Inside, the light is dim but golden. A lantern swings gently, shadows stretching like fingers across the patched walls. The chinked seams stand out, irregular and rough, but they also tell a story of care. Every filled gap is a mark of someone's hands, a gesture of defiance against the winter. You glance toward the stove, hear the iron ping as it expands with heat, and notice how the room feels warmer than it should. The small efforts are working. You lean closer to the wall, nose nearly touching the damp clay. The smell of earth is strong, mixed with smoke from the stove. In the faint light, you can see strands of straw poking out, little whiskers that quiver when wind presses against the outside. For a moment, you imagine the cabin itself is alive, shivering, but determined, held together by human stubbornness and handfuls of mud. Curiously, a few families even experimented with plastering walls inside and out, using a slurry of lime and sand if they could obtain it. It was rare on the frontier, but those who managed claimed their cabins stayed far warmer. You picture the bright white plaster shining inside a one-room cabin, reflecting lamplight so strongly that nights felt shorter, brighter, almost civilized. But the expense was too high for most. So, the majority settled for mud that cracked and moss that molded. Outside, the wind howls again, testing the defenses. You sit quietly, listening to the muffled roar. Snow taps against the chinked walls, but the air inside remains steady, warmer than you expected. A child curls against your side, blanket tucked tight, whispering about the sound the storm makes, like wolves circling, like ghosts brushing past. You stroke their hair, whispering back that the walls will hold, and you almost believe it yourself. Hours later, dawn slips in, pale and thin. You peer out a small opening and see drifts piled high against the logs. Sealing them further, the sun's rays sparkle on snow crust, but the air remains bitter. Behind you, the patched walls stand firm, mud drying in strange patterns, rags bulging slightly. Not beautiful, not perfect, but functional. The family stirs, stretching stiff limbs, ready to repeat the work again. Take one last look at the wall. Each uneven seam is a scar, a reminder of the struggle waged nightly between warmth and frost. In the end, survival is not about elegance. It is about hands pressed into cold mud, voices raised in determination, and the belief that even the smallest effort can hold back the endless storm. The storm lingers outside, but inside the cabin, another element takes center stage. Fire and iron. You step toward the stove, hear the low hum of burning wood, and feel warmth creep into your fingertips. This simple black box is no luxury. It is the beating heart of survival. Without it, the walls patched with mud and straw would still bleed cold. With it, families could pretend, if only briefly, that the blizzard could be tamed. Iron stoves revolutionized home life on the frontier. Before their spread in the mid-1800s, open fireplaces were common, but they wasted fuel and bled heat up the chimney. The box stove, with its door, chimney pipe, and flat top for cooking, allowed settlers to stretch every stick of wood, every coal, every handful of dried buffalo chips. In diaries, pioneers marveled at how a small load of kindling could warm an entire one-room house. You lean close, palm hovering above the top, and feel the steady pulse of heat radiating outward. And yet, curiously enough, that same lifeline carried risks. Chimneys often smoked poorly when cobbled together from mud and stones. Rooms filled with a haze that stung eyes and throats, leaving walls dark with soot. Imagine lying under a quilt, drifting toward sleep, and waking with your lungs raw from breathing smoke all night. Some settlers even joked darkly that smoke alone might kill them before the storm outside had a chance. Step closer in. The smell is thick, pine sap crackling, resin releasing a sweet, sharp scent that clings to your clothes. Smoke curls lazily from the pipe, leaving a faint metallic tang. You hear the crack and settle of logs as they collapse inward, orange embers glowing like tiny suns. A kettle rattles softly on top, steam whispering from its spout, filling the room with the scent of dried herbs steeping in hot water. Families often gathered around this little iron hearth, not only for heat, but for companionship. You see them now, circling close, children sprawled on rag rugs, parents drawing chairs nearer, A dog curled so close that its fur nearly singes, voices lower to murmurs, as though the stove itself demands reverence. The storm may shriek at the walls, but here at the center, there is a pool of warmth and light. An odd anecdote emerges from settler journals. Some households dried laundry by hanging it directly above the stove, filling the cabin with the smell of damp wool and soap. At night, when clothing steamed and hissed in the heat, families joked that they were living inside a giant soup kettle. Imagine lying under your blanket, hearing your shirt sizzle faintly overhead, knowing at least you'd have something warm to pull on in the morning. The stove doubled as a kitchen, of course. You picture bread baked on iron plates, beans simmering in a pot, bacon hissing as fat dripped and smoked. The smell is rich, comforting, yet slightly acrid. Food took on the taste of smoke, and though settlers grew tired of it, you would gladly swallow those smoky morsels now, grateful for any warmth in your belly. Still, hazards never left. Sparks leapt from the open door, sometimes igniting rugs or straw bedding. Children bore scars from leaning too close. Their skin blistered where iron kissed flesh. There are letters describing mothers holding infants back, warning again and again. Yet accidents happened. A small tragedy could unfold in seconds, the kind that left a family shaken for years. The noises wrap around you. Wood popping, the faint hiss of sap, a child humming softly. Outside, the wind throws handfuls of snow against the roof. But the sound is muted here. The stove has become its own weather system, a tiny sun in a frozen universe. You close your eyes and let the heat seep deeper until your shoulders unclench. But the comfort doesn't erase exhaustion. Someone must feed the fire, rising in the dark hours, stumbling with half-frozen logs to keep the embers alive. Picture yourself waking at midnight, fumbling to stir the ashes, your breath fogging in the cold air that creeps back the moment flames falter. You stuff wood into the stove, hear it roar weakly to life, and know you've won only a temporary reprieve. Oddly, even in this hardship, there were moments of almost comic absurdity. Some families reported cooking everything from bread to coffee to soap on the same stovetop. The smells mingled together. So breakfast might taste faintly of lye, or stew might carry a whiff of laundry soap. You wrinkle your nose, smiling faintly despite yourself, imagining such peculiar meals shared around the table. As the night drags on, the stove glows red, throwing long shadows across the log walls. Children sleep tangled in quilts, their cheeks flushed with heat. Adults sit quietly, staring into the small window of fire through the iron grate, thoughts wandering as steadily as the flames. You join them in silence, hypnotized by the dance of light and shadow. When morning comes, frost clings thick to the windows, but inside, it is survivable. You stretch stiff muscles, smell yesterday's smoke in your hair, and hear the crackle of one last ember sighing in the ashes. The stove has done its work. It has held the night at bay. Step back from it now in your imagination. See the cabin as a whole, smoke trailing gently into the pale sky, a fragile column marking human resistance on an endless plain of snow. For all its hazards, the iron stove remains the difference between life and death, between frostbitten silence and one more dawn. The stove still glows faintly behind you, but tonight your attention lifts upward to the creaking structure overhead. A roof on the frontier was never just a lid. It was a gamble, too light and the snow pressed it down until the whole cabin caved in, too heavy, and the timbers cracked under their own strain. You stand inside as the storm rages, watching flakes sift through a gap and melt into tiny drops on the dirt floor. The roof is the cabin's most fragile promise. Settlers used whatever roofing materials they could secure. Overlapping shingles split from logs, bark stripped from trees, prairie grasses tied into bundles, or sod itself piled thick above rafters. Each choice had consequences. Wood shingles shed water better, but they demanded precious timber. Grass thatch was lighter, but rodents nested there, scratching all night above sleeping heads. Sod roofs insulated, but sagged dangerously under heavy snow. You look upward and see all of these risks in your mind, the roof groaning as if it knows its own weakness. For now, you return indoors, sink to the dirt floor, and close your eyes to the slow percussion of drips and groans. The roof trembles, but it does not fall. Not tonight. Greased paper windows. The roof above groans but holds, and now your eyes drift to the rough rectangle cut into one wall. It isn't glass that greets you there. Glass is far too dear and heavy to haul across hundreds of miles of prairie. Instead, light filters through a thin, waxy film stretched taut across the opening. You lean closer, nose almost against it, and notice how the world outside blurs into shifting gray. Many windows were nothing more than holes, covered with greased paper or animal hide. The settlers, ingenious and desperate, coated sheets of paper with lard or bear grease until they became translucent, letting in a dull glow while blocking the fiercest drafts. You press your hand to the film and feel its tacky texture, faintly oily, as if it might crumble beneath your touch. Yet it serves its purpose. Without it, the opening would be only another mouth for the wind to roar through. Curiously enough, children sometimes drew little pictures on those paper panes before they were greased, so the family could enjoy faint outlines of birds, flowers. Imagine sitting in a one-room cabin in the middle of a howling storm, your only view of the outside world, a blurred sketch of a bird, wings forever spread in oily translucence, a fragile piece of beauty pressed into a wall of mud and timber. Step closer still. The paper smells faintly of smoke and animal fat, mingled with the ever-present musk of damp logs. You watch as frost creeps along its edges, delicate feathers of ice spreading in silence. The window seems alive, its surface breathing with every gust outside. When the wind presses hard, the sheet flexes inward like a drum, trembling as if about to split. You hold your breath, waiting, but somehow it does not give way. The view it grants is strange, neither clear nor opaque. Outside, shapes blur. The ghostly white of snow drifts, the dark blur of trees bending in the gale, the faint shadow of a figure moving to gather wood. You cannot tell if it is neighbor, stranger, or memory, only that the world is there, beyond reach. It is both comforting and lonely, like hearing voices through a wall. An odd anecdote survives in letters. Settlers sometimes pasted multiple layers of paper for strength, overlapping sheets from old hymnals, seed catalogs, or school primers. Imagine the odd mosaic that resulted. Snippets of scripture glowing beside seed prices, fragments of arithmetic tables shining faintly with the morning sun. A child, learning numbers by candlelight, could glance up and see them glowing right from the window pane. Inside, the family treats the window with reverence. Children are warned not to press against it, lest it tear. At night, Shutters, rough boards, hinged with leather, swing shut to block the cold. The cabin plunges into darkness, then the only light from the stove or lanterns. You feel the shift, the hush when the shutters close, as though the house itself blinks its eyes shut to sleep. Night falls heavier. The storm presses close, but 2 stoves burn instead of one. 2 circles of quilts glow in the lamplight. Through cracks in the partition, faint lines of gold trace the seams. Proof that warmth and light bleed across. Ignoring borders, you lie back, eyes on the roof beams, listening to the murmur of neighbors, the occasional burst of laughter. The storm may rage outside, but here, behind this crude architecture of sharing, life continues stubbornly. Curiously enough, there are stories of children clambering onto those very roofs to shovel snow off, their small figures almost swallowed by the white landscape. Picture them stumbling along the peak with crude shovels, parents shouting from below, the wind threatening to knock them down. It was absurd and terrifying, but also necessary. Without that effort, the weight of a single storm could collapse the home entirely. You place your hand on a supporting post and feel it shiver faintly under the load. Outside, snow falls heavier, a steady hush, like sand pouring onto cloth. The roof darkens under the weight, groaning, sometimes cracking loud enough to wake the whole family in the night. You smell damp bark and mold, the earthy aroma of sod overhead, every drop that leaks through lands on bedding, spreading into dark stains that steam faintly near the stove. The soundscape is relentless. Drips patter into tin cups placed on the floor to catch them. Wind whistles through gaps where shingles overlap imperfectly. Mice scurry in the thatch above, their nails clicking softly. All of it creates a restless chorus, reminding you every moment that the storm owns the land, and your roof is nothing but a borrowed shield. An odd anecdote appears from settler letters. Families sometimes decorated their roofs with lines of stones, or even old wagon wheels, hoping to keep shingles from blowing away. Imagine glancing up to see the outline of a wagon wheel silhouetted against the pale sky, not as a symbol of travel anymore, but as ballast holding down the very top of your world. And still, even with such measures, collapse was common. Diaries tell of sudden crashes, whole sections giving way under snow or ice, families scrambling to drag bedding out before it was ruined. You hear that imagined thunder now, the split and crash, dust and snow bursting into the room. Hearts hammer, children cry, adults shout orders as they prop beams with whatever they can find. Chairs, barrels, their own shoulders. The fear lingers long after the roof is patched. Every creak, a reminder of how thin the margin of safety is. Yet even in this precarious shelter, people found ways to carve out comfort. Imagine lying beneath that sagging roof, wrapped in quilts, listening to the fire crackle. Rain or snow drips softly into a bucket beside you, but you lull yourself to sleep with its rhythm, like a rustic lullaby. Sometimes small tragedies became ordinary sounds. Leaks, until the unusual turned strangely soothing. Step outside with me in your mind. Look back at the cabin, its roof hunched under thick white drifts, smoke trailing from the chimney. It seems fragile, yes, but also defiant. Against a horizon erased by storm, it stands as a stubborn, black mark. Here we endure. You brush snow from your shoulders and imagine the weight that presses not just on timbers, but on every heart inside. And still, somehow, the walls hold. The roof holds, and dawn will come again. On rare sunny mornings, the whole cabin glows softly, as if lit from within. The greased paper catches the light, diffusing it into a golden haze. Dust motes swirl lazily in the beam, and for a few blessed hours, the space feels almost warm, almost cheerful. You sit by the wall, close your eyes, and imagine that the storm has ended, though you know it hasn't. Oddly, when settlers later wrote of these paper windows, many did so with a kind of nostalgia. Glass eventually replaced them, but the memory of blurred light and greasy texture lingered. Perhaps because it symbolized the raw invention of those desperate winters, or perhaps because hardship often turns into cherished story when retold by survivors. You lean back now, away from the fragile pain. The cabin darkens again as clouds swallow the sun. The storm's voice returns louder, wind shrieking, snow scraping against the walls. But still the paper holds, trembling but unbroken, like the families inside. As night gathers, shutters close, the last glow fades, and you sit in darkness, lit only by a stove's sigh. Outside remains a mystery, sealed away by paper, grease, and wood. Inside, though the air is warmer, the family closer, and the storm, though unyielding, cannot erase the small light that lingers here. The storm has ended, but in your mind, you linger. The cabin walls are no longer closing in. They are simply shelter, simple wood that stood firm when the world roared. Outside, the prairie stretches vast and white, but now its silence is gentle. Its winds softened, the wolves are gone, the shelves nearly empty, but the fire glows still, embers steady, casting shadows that flicker like promises. Your breathing slows with theirs. Your shoulders soften, as if wrapped in their quilts. Each sound fades, the crackle of the stove, the faint drip of thawing icicles, the sigh of wind along the roof. It all settles into a hush, a cradle of calm, where nothing urgent remains. You picture stars above, endless and kind, spreading their light across the prairie. You picture fields waiting patiently under snow, seeds asleep but not gone, spring certain to come. And you picture the family resting deeply, bodies heavy with earned peace, dreams carrying them into warmer days. So let your own eyes close now. Let your breath deepen. Let your thoughts slow. The storm has passed. The cabin is safe. And you are safe too. Drift gently, as if wrapped in quilts of smoke and wool, drifting toward dreams, where winter's edge melts into spring's quiet promise.